Explication versus intensification. Jesus is explicating the law. He's not intensifying it. So he's getting into the minute details of how the law actually shows the heart. We've talked about how Paul even says, I would not know what sin was but for the law. Because even Paul understands that, or Paul especially I should say, understands that the law is a heart issue. It's not an intensity issue. So when Jesus is talking about adultery and murder, those things are all born in the heart, and that sin starts in the heart. Because out of the overflow of the heart, Scripture says the mouth speaks, and really out of the overflow of the heart, the body does. No sin is born in the flesh unless it is first born in the heart, and that's kind of what Jesus is getting at. Okay? Even in the very first murder that we have recorded, the murder starts in Cain's heart through anger before it ever manifests in the flesh through him killing Abel. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we're explicating, we're not intensifying. So when Jesus says, if you're angry with your brother in your heart, you've already committed murder against him, he's not making it harder to follow. He's showing the real intent. Our audience are the Jews who are the crowd in Galilee. Remember, this is taking place by the Sea of Galilee, or we would call it, in those days, they would have called it Lake Tiberias. The Sea of Galilee, Lake Tiberias are the same thing. We say sea, but that would be like calling one of the Great Lakes a sea. It's not really a sea, it's a lake. Even in Hebrew, they call it Lake Kneseret, which is harp lake. Kneseret is harp in Hebrew. And it's shaped like a harp, and it sits between a couple of different mountain ranges, and the winds there can get pretty intense. But it's not really a sea. It's not salt water. It's a lake. It's a freshwater lake. And I've swam in the sea. On a calm day, it's nice and flat. But when those winds start to whip up through the mountains, and they come down, and they all kind of converge on the lake, you can get some pretty significant waves. So they're on the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake of Galilee, Lake Tiberias, Lake Kneseret. You might actually, in Scripture, I do believe it does refer to Lake Tiberias at one point or another. But that's just, it's the same. It's kind of like how on the Rio Grande, which is the river that separates Texas from Mexico. We call it the Rio Grande. You know what they call it? In Mexico, they call it the Rio Bravo. Okay, so they have a different name for the same river. It's my children. All right. So the Jews are there. The crowds, the scribes and the Pharisees are there. Why is it important, again, that the Pharisees are there? Who are the Pharisees to Jesus? They're his peers. Right? And how are they Jesus' peers? Because he was a Pharisee. Okay? Remember, in order to teach, in order to be a rabbi, you kind of had to be part of one of these different sects. And he's not going to align himself with the Sadducees because they don't believe in a physical resurrection. Problematic, right? He's not going to be one of the Essenes because they're kind of cultish. He's not going to be one of the Zealots, which is ironic because the Essenes are where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls from. But that's a different point. He's not going to be part of the Zealots like Simon was, because the Zealots are more of a violent sect. Phil Long, who some of you know, says that zeal is something in the ancient world. Zeal was something done with a knife, so it often had violent undertones. So if you think like the IRA. Okay, that's kind of, you're getting close to what zeal is for the Zealots.
Didn't he issue an open challenge
Who?
to the Pharisees to follow him when he did some of the things that he did?
Yeah, he's always inviting them to follow him, and then he's always saying to an extent, you brood of vipers, right? You whitewash tombs, And we always think that Jesus is this really meek, non-confrontational person who's always very polite, always very kind. You cannot call somebody a viper in a nice way. You cannot call somebody a whitewashed tomb in a nice way. All right?
It was kind of snarky.
Yeah, you can't go into the temple twice and drive out people with a braided, whip in a nice way. All right, that doesn't mean he sinned at all. But, if we think that there isn't snark in the Bible, I want to remind you that John immortalized the fact that he beat Peter in a foot race to the tomb. So, anyway, so Pharisees are there, and of course Jesus' disciples are also there. Okay? He has been hammering really hard on kind of the three pillars, right, of Judaism. Anybody have notes from last week when we talked about the pillars of Judaism? Anybody remember what those are? Torah, which is what? Okay. Avodah, right? Avodah. So there's prayer. Yeah, Gemut.
Wait a second. Put it in English.
Chasadim. No, the CH in Hebrew is so you have to say it with phlegm. Chasadim. Mashiach. Right? There's a yeah.
So the Kasadim means what? Oh gosh.
So these are the three pillars of Judaism, okay? You have Torah, which is the law. You have Avodah, which is prayer. And then you have the Gemut Chasadim. So what he's getting at here is he's getting at the law, right? We've seen him explicating the law. We've seen him, we just got done with his explication of prayer, with the Lord's Prayer. Now, he's also touched on Gemut Chasadim, the good works, okay, which he has, remember what some of these good works are? We already talked about one of them in the text. Anybody want to read back through the text and figure out which good work he's talking about?
Fasting?
No, we're getting to fasting.
Oh, that's what we're doing.
Starts with an A. Alms, there you go. Alms giving. And he's already said when you do it in private, okay? Or when you do it, let not your right hand know what your left hand is doing, okay? Now we're going to talk about another good work, which is what? Fasting. This is a good work. This is something you do. All right? All right, let's read this here. Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I tell you, or I say to you, that they have their reward in full. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. So anoint your head means wash your hair. And wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So they would make a big deal, just like they would with their almsgiving, just like they would with their prayer. They would make a big deal about it. Do you remember how they would make a big deal about prayer? We talked about that last week.
Loud.
3 times a day, right? Once at dawn, once at noon, once in the evening. They would pray toward what? Toward the temple. Yeah. Okay. So they would arrange their schedules so that they were in the middle of a busy area when noon struck. All right, and then they had to pray. So it's very public practice. He's saying don't do that because you have your reward. God's not going to answer your prayer because you already have what you want, right? Almsgiving. It's good that you're giving to the poor, but if you do it with the wrong heart motive, you've received your reward because all you want to do is get noticed, right? Fasting is a good spiritual discipline, okay, especially, If you're praying about something, prayer and fasting, it's important. There are different types of fasts you can do, but fasting is an important discipline even for Christians. They would make it so that way people would notice they were fasting. They would complain about their hunger, how long it had been going on. They wouldn't wash themselves well, so you could see that, they were hungry. All that good stuff, okay? So Jesus is saying, you already have your reward for that. You're not getting anything else out of it. What does he say about prayer, Jesus? He says, go to your secret place. What does he say about alms? Give it in secret. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. What about your fasting? Do it in secret so that nobody knows that you're doing it. Don't put it on, don't put it out there. Just do it.
Could you explain more why you think fasting is important today?
It's a good discipline. Paul talks about it, but it's part of. So you can do different fasts. So it's not necessarily food, although food is part of it. But you could do like a social media fast or electronics fast. It's important to set aside time to disconnect from different things. So even other Christian denominations like Baptists will practice fasting. Catholics do fasting. The Lutherans do fasting. It's built in. It's a way to reset, especially if you're looking for like a hard decision, because every time that hunger pang hits, it's supposed to be a reminder to be in Scripture and in prayer. Does that make sense?
It helps for hard decisions for when you want to go to, say, electronics.
Like if I had that like when we were trying to move out here, I did a fast, but it was every time that hunger pang hit, it would remind me, okay, seek the Lord, seek Scripture. That's really what it's supposed to. Yeah. And I did a moderated fast. I didn't eat through the day, but I would drink water, and then I would usually take an evening meal. But there are times where I fasted from caffeine. I'm not a very nice person when that happens. There have been times when I fasted from social media. Every time I want to look at Facebook, there's that time where, okay, I feel that impulse. That impulse reminds me to go to pray, to seek the Lord, to pray for whatever it is that I'm seeking guidance on. Right. So it's just one of those. It's one of those rhythms. And if it's not countermanded in the New Testament, we can assume that it's safe practice. That's generally the way we do these things. So, say it again.
Was the term that you used countermand?
Countermanded. So if like, for example, circumcision is countermanded. Paul says it's not necessary. So we don't need to follow that. A lot of the sacrificial laws have been countermanded because of Christ. Yeah. So, yeah. As opposed to commanded, countermanded. Yeah. So a lot of commentaries will call this and the other examples we've talked about as religious exhibitionism, right? You're doing it to be seen. So when Jesus says whenever, that it was an expected aspect of Jewish life. So the Jews did it as a means of this rhythm. There would be certain periods where they would be commanded to fast as part of the law. And so it was an expected rhythm. John the Baptist's disciples did it. Jesus' disciples did it. Jesus did it. In fact, Jesus went on a 40-day fast. Anyway, that 40-day fast is the model for Lent, by the way. So Ramadan, the Muslims fast because it's found in the Old Testament, and they just lifted the Old Testament or parts of it anyway. Fast. There was only one fast specifically mentioned in the Old Testament, and this was the Day of Atonement, which was observed in the 7th month. The Jewish leaders appointed additional fast days to remember specific times of stress in Israel's national history. In addition, the rabbis increased the times of fasting to twice a week, Monday and Thursday, Thursday because that was the day they said Moses went up onto Mount Sinai, and Monday because that was the day he came down. They use these fasts as a means to flaunt their spirituality. Okay? So again, he's not attacking the practice of fasting. He's attacking the exhibitionism that is seen in the way that the Pharisees and the scribes and really the Sanhedrin as a whole is using these as a means to display their piety. So yeah, again, the context is spiritual exhibitionism. Our spiritual lives are to be seen primarily by God. We seek his approval, not the approval of men. Okay? Any questions on that?
I would think for some people fasting would be dangerous.
Yes. That's why, like I said, there's different types of fasting.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily food. Like you could fast from, like I said, social media. You could fast from television. This is more of a problem for my generation, but video games, stuff like that. But again, the point is that you're denying yourself something to seek after the Lord. No. And it's when that desire for that thing creeps up that it's supposed to spurn you on to be in prayer, to be in scripture, that kind of thing. It's more like a reminder. Okay? And usually you do it for a set number of days. So it's not like you're denying yourself that thing for forever, but it's a set number of days. And, it's different for every person, different for every fast. All right. We'll do one more before we dismiss because I know it's getting late. Matthew, we're going to pick up in 6:19. Do not store yourselves up treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither rust nor moth destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now we're going to have to get into some Hebraisms here, but we've talked about this before. Anybody remember what a Hebraism is?
A group of words.
I know. Well, I mean, yeah, they're a group of words, but what's special about those group of words? If I said, so we, if I were to say an Americanism, could you think of what an Americanism would be?
The way we put words together that mean.
So an Americanism is, here's a great one, keep your eye on the ball. Wait, who knows where that comes from? Baseball, okay? All right.
Another country wouldn't understand that.
If somebody was next in line, we would say, you're on deck, right? You're on deck this weekend. I've used that a couple of different times. You're on deck for whatever. That's another Americanism. As American as apple pie. Right? That's another Americanism. If I were to say you're off your rocker. Okay? Those are different Americanisms that we could use. Fly your flag high. Right? That's another. It's not necessarily an Americanism, but we have these things that are phrases in our language that make sense to us. All right, that don't necessarily make sense in a different context. Okay, for example, one of my favorite, I would say it's a Mexicanism. All right, is when you want to say I'm not lying. All right, and you want to be really sincere in the fact that you say, I'm not lying. Do you know what you say? No tengo pelo en mi lengua. Okay, I don't have hair on my tongue. All right, now why you would say that, I have no idea. It doesn't translate well into English, but you could say something like honest to God, right? That would be a good way of translating that idea. No tengo pelo en mi lengua. I don't have hair on my tongue.
Hair
Okay.
or air?
Hair on my tongue,
Oh, God.
right? Or another one, when I want to say have a nice day, pasa un buen día, right? Pass a good day. Pass un buen día, all right?
Okay, that's I can understand better than hair on your tongue.
Right. No, I know. It's yeah. Right. Okay.
Must have come from somewhere, but who knows?
Hay fever is another Americanism. All right. So there are certain phrases, words, things that we use that can't really be translated literally because, like, there's no hair on my tongue. It doesn't convey what I'm actually trying to say. So when we're interpreting scripture, okay, this is what's called there's this thing called formal equivalency. Anybody want to take a guess as what formal equivalency is?
You translate it literally and it loses its meaning.
So formal equivalency is as near as word to word, or they try to get it as close to word as you can get. Then there's dynamic equivalency. What do you think that is?
The thrust of it, the thrust of the idea.
Yep. So this is word for word. This is idea for idea. Okay. Honestly, you need both, but generally I prefer a dynamic over a formal, because I want to know in my language what that means as opposed to a word for word. Okay. So a Hebraism is a Jewish phrase that has meaning for them that gets lost in translation. Okay? So for example, eye being the light, if your eye is full of light, what does that mean? Anybody here know what eye is full of light means? Or if your eye is full of darkness? Okay, so we would say maybe it's we don't see, but that's not what Jesus is like. We don't see the truth. That's not what Jesus is getting at necessarily. The day of the Lord is a Hebraism. You know what the day of the Lord is?
Because the judgment.
It's a type of judgment. You know how many day of the Lords are, or how many days of the Lord you find in Scripture? A lot. Are they all referring to the same event? No, but they're all referring to judgment. So the day of the Lord is shorthand for judgment of God or wrath of God. Okay? Does that make sense? So let's look at this. Do not store up, which is literally means stop treasuring up treasures. Okay? Okay, here's another example of Hebraism. All right? This is the one that slipped my mind just a second ago. When Jesus says, if you do not hate mother, father, sister, brother, you can have no part of me. Does Jesus really mean that we are supposed to hate mother, father, sister, brother? No. Because he says, love your neighbor as yourself. So what does he mean? It's a Hebraism. We can't understand what Jesus is saying if we don't understand that turn of phrase. It's called, in Jewish thought, this is called a comparative degree. So when Jesus says, if you do not hate mother, father, brother, sister, what he's saying is if the love that you have for me doesn't make the love that you have for your family look like hate, you have no part of me. He's not actually commanding you to hate your brother, mother, sister, father.
That would be a contradiction. Honor your mother and father.
Right. So again, comparative degrees. That's a type of Hebraism. All right. So here we have another type of Hebraism. Stop treasuring up treasures. This is the same wordplay also found in Matthew 6:20, and it usually refers to stop an act that is already in progress. So what Jesus is saying, don't make it a habit. of storing up treasures here on earth. All right. The desire of fallen humanity is to try to provide by means of their own resources, and that is all that is needed for a happy life. The grammatical construction here shows that this is also a temptation for redeemed humanity. True happiness and success are found only in dependence on God and the contentment He has provided. And you can find numerous examples of this in what book? Where people are lamenting the fact that I've stored up all these things, I've had all these treasures, and it all means nothing. Ecclesiastes. All right. In the ancient world, wealth emanated from three sources. Clothing, especially festival clothing that was passed down through families. All right. Food stuff, and precious metal or jewels. Each of these items may either be destroyed or stolen. So the moths that Jesus is saying will come and destroy the clothes are these festival clothes that are worth great value. Think like, you're saving your wedding dress for your daughter. That piece of clothing has great value, but it can be destroyed. Similar idea. Rust is from the root. Rust really is from the root to eat, which means to eat away or corrode, and was used for vermins eating food. So another Hebraism. Okay. So eating food. Bugs, rats, mice, critters who would eat food. So metal rusts, yes, but they didn't have an understanding of necessarily why metal rusts. They just knew that it happened. Oxidization was a thing you could observe. It didn't necessarily have a name. So it was viewed as like little critters eating away at your blade. But really, the root of this word is vermin eating your food. And then stealing obviously referred to robbery of precious metals, jewels, or the other two items. So being clothing or food. Okay. That was how you measured your wealth. Clothing, food, jewels, gold, stuff like that. The word destroy there means disfigure. It can also mean to cause to disappear. The term, here's an interesting thing. Again, this is another kind of ancient world idea that you need to understand in order to get the full thrust. The term break in meant dig through. Any ideas why break in might mean dig through in the first century? What were the walls made of? What were the walls made of? Stone, right? There's this stone that's everywhere in Israel, and it's kind of a red, almost a red sandstone, and it's stacked. So you could drill through or dig through the wall to get into the house. It was noisy, but you could do it. Many homes of this period had either stone or mud walls. In Greek, the word for robber came from the same compound term as mud or stone digger. So, thieves come in to destroy. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It is significant that these plural words, which have been used in the previous verses, now change to singular words. This section is the transitoriness of earthly things versus the permanence of spiritual things. It also emphasizes that where one puts one's interest, resources, energy, truly reveals one's priorities. The heart, which is a Hebraism, is the center of a person, and it expresses the totality of one's self. So where your treasure is, you will find yourself. Does that make sense? Everybody tracking with that? Lastly, these last two verses are obviously antithetical. The antithesis, which is pitting two opposite things against each other, is compared to good versus bad, single versus double, generous versus stingy, healthy versus diseased. The eye was used because of the singleness that healthy vision provides versus the double or blurred vision, which is caused by diseases that can darken the eye. Okay. These verses contain three conditional sentences, which we can pit off against each other.
You're losing me for a second.
So yeah, this is if your eye is light, full of light, or if it's good, it's full of light, meaning you can see what's going on before you. Okay, you can see the truth of what's happening before you. Comparing the physical health of the eye, of a good eye versus the bad health of the diseased of a bad eye. So here, the word good means healthy. It doesn't mean function. I mean, it can mean functioning properly, but it's not talking about good or evil. It's talking about the health, the wholeness of the eye. So bad in context, again, does not refer to evil, but it refers to the diseased eye. So, for example, when somebody has cataracts, right, you lose vision. That's what it's talking about. So it's hard for you to see what's going on because your eye is diseased. So it's hard for you to see the truth of what Jesus is saying, right? Versus somebody who has an eye that is full of light, meaning is wide open, can see, and can take in the truth that Jesus is giving, versus the eye that can't. And so he's saying that the eye that can't take in the light, how dark then is that eye? How bad, how diseased is that eye? Goes along with what Jesus says about how the Jews were permanently, or were given over to blindness, like they were struck blind, so they couldn't see. It's that idea. And how their ears were stopped up so they couldn't hear. And that was so that the crucifixion could happen. Okay? Same idea. Those who clearly see spiritual truths are those who can see, who have a good eye, and those who can't see are spiritually blind. Yeah.
May I ask about your sources that you got a lot of this?
Just pulling from a lot of different sources. Yeah, it's all online books and books I have in my office, stuff like that. But it's a lot of it is you can actually find it in Jewish phrases. Like there's a book, Jewish idioms and phrases in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. That's a lot of where you're getting this stuff from. But a lot of it's just a historical legwork, trying to figure out what it meant in the first century. Because here's the honest truth. If we don't know what it meant in the first century, we can't apply it accurately today. The problem with most Christians is we don't have there's 2,000 years between when this was written, in say, Matthew was written probably pretty early, especially if we take we'll say between 40 and 50, and now, okay? We're in 2024, we're not in 2000, we're in 2024. So there's almost 2,000 years and several languages between us and them. Not to mention, this is the ancient Near East, and we're in the modern West. Okay, so there's trains of thought that are different. So we tend to be more logical, building one on top of the other. We like our events to be in chronological order. Well, for the Jew in the ancient Near East, the order of events didn't matter. It was that the event happened that mattered. And so you could craft your story, putting events, because again, it's not important the order in which events happen. It's important that the event happened. You could arrange events to tell the overall narrative that you wanted to tell. That's why sometimes the events in the gospel are seemingly out of order, because they're doing this with an ancient Near Eastern understanding of chronology as opposed to a Western understanding of chronology. We like them 1, 2, 3, 4. They're like, well, if 4 helps me underscore this point, I'm going to put it before 1. And if 1 doesn't really help me here, I might put it over between 2 and 3.
That brings up another point. Can
Yeah.
you have Bibles that are in chronological order? Does that help?
You can, and there are at least for the synoptics, you can do what is called you can find what are called harmonized readings, and that'll help put it in chronological order. But again, you'll see maybe something like from Matthew 5 through 7, and then Luke has it in chapter 10, and then the events that he has beforehand happen after in Matthew. So it's the difference between thinking. I use this example all the time in the movie Sahara with Matthew McConaughey, right? He gets stranded. They're in the desert, and he has to go. He's doing some archaeological legwork to try to find a Civil War sub that has disappeared in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Okay, an Ironside. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. I'd recommend it. And the only place he can go that will have records going as far back as he needs. Now, he's only going back, he's in the late 2000s. He's only going back 150 years, maybe, to the Civil War. But he's got to find evidence that the sub, or this Ironside, passed this way. So where does he go? You're in the Middle East, you want history, where do you go? You go to a mosque, because they keep records of everything. And so when he goes in there, he says, I need to find evidence of a great storm that happened in this year, in this month. And he goes, do you have any idea what was, the imam says, do you have any idea what was going on around that time period? And he goes, well, there was a great storm. And then he said, but why? He's like, because we use events to find dates. We don't use dates to find events. And that really underscores kind of this ancient Near Eastern philosophy that both the Muslim has as well as the Jew. We don't care the events, the order happen. It's that they happen that's important. And we use that to craft our narrative. Does that make sense? So, but yeah, a lot of this stuff comes from just legwork, trying to figure out what people are saying, why Jesus uses the I. What does good mean versus bad? Well, in the Greek, there are these two words. It's not righteous and unrighteous, which is what we think of good versus bad, or good versus evil. It's healthy versus diseased. Those are the words in Greek. So that really helps you underscore. But we have to understand what happened here when they're writing, and that's what helps inform us here. I think I did I do the city? I think I did it once. We'll do this real quick and then we'll go.
I love the way that erases.
I do too. It's very nice.
Wow, it's just,
Well, the fact that this is glass makes it really nice. Okay, so over on this side of the village, or over on this side of the Bible, right, we have their town. So this is what it meant to them. Because Matthew's obviously writing to a specific group of people at a specific time, and we have to figure out what it means in their town. So how do we figure that out? Okay? So between us and them, there's this river. Okay? And in this river that separates us, there's things like language, historical context, culture, all that stuff. And we have to understand the language, the historical context, the culture that they're in order to adequately interpret it for today. Once we understand this river, we then build a bridge called the principalizing bridge, where we can now move from their town into our town. Now we're taking out the right message. We're taking out the right things, and we're transporting them. The fourth stop on this journey is this billboard here, where we're checking what we found versus the rest of Scripture. Okay? If any of the things that we're trying to pull out of their town over the river and over the bridge doesn't match the rest of Scripture, well, we have to start over. Right? And then finally we get to our town over here, where we can now accurately understand what Scripture is saying. But this is a whole process. And a lot of this stuff that's in the river you find in books, you find in histories, you find in study Bibles. I mean, it's all over the place. That's why, like my dad was saying this morning, depending on which source you read for Thessalonica, you could have between 100,000 to 200,000 people. But that, again, that depends on which source you read. So sometimes these sources are going to disagree, so it's our job to go through it and take the most credible evidence we can find and pull that out. And sometimes that means going outside of Scripture to try to find this language, culture, history stuff we're talking about. That make sense? Okay. Any questions? All right.